Welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining. Undoubtedly, we are living in a fractured society, a society that often creates fractured lives. But right here, right now, you're in a safe and courageous space where you belong. No matter your profession, your past, your curiosity, or your outlook on life, this evening, we belong to and with one another. So before we get started, I just want to take a minute to thank and acknowledge the Stoneleigh Foundation for creating this space to bring us together to rediscover the promise of beloved community, where transformative healing and restorative justice is not only possible, but absolutely necessary. So as we know, the Stoneleigh Foundation has a long-standing history of investing in restorative justice, dating back at least to 2009, when Danielle Sered was awarded a Stoneleigh Fellowship at the Vera Institute of Justice. During her tenure as a fellow, Danielle developed and launched Common Justice, a groundbreaking restorative and participatory justice model that advances really viable solutions to violence without relying on incarceration. Since that time, the foundation has continued to build upon that foundation with fellowships focused on assessing and expanding the use of restorative justice in Philadelphia's youth justice system, sponsored by Ghani Mason, and building a national movement around the use of restorative practices in cases of serious harm involving youth, such as the programs supported by Jody Kent-Levy. Stoneleigh also recognizes and prioritizes the importance of youth leadership and their voice in this work, which is why the foundation is partnering with several youth-led and youth-centered organizations that also offer restorative programming to young people and their families throughout the city. This evening, however, Stoneleigh has invited us to Doing Sorry, a webinar exploring restorative justice practices for serious harms. And although this is a fireside chat, given the temps as of late, I think I'm able to take liberty to change that to a lakeside chat. No shade intended. But I don't do the heat well. So this evening we have the privilege of listening in to a conversation with the incomparable Danielle Sered and Ghani Kempis Songster. So Danielle currently serves as Executive Director of Common Justice, where she develops and advances solutions to violence that transforms the lives of those harmed and foster racial equity without relying on incarceration. Danielle launched Common Justice as a 2009-24 Stoneleigh Fellow, at the Vera Institute of Justice. Previously, she served as the Deputy Director of Vera's Adolescent Reentry Initiative, a program for young men returning from incarceration on Rikers Island. Prior to joining Vera, Danielle worked at the Center for Court Innovation's Harlem Community Justice Center, where she led its programs for court-involved and recently incarcerated youth. Danielle has designed programs that teach conflict resolution through arts in school and juvenile detention centers, and she has developed violence intervention and trauma-informed curricula. In addition, she has experience with a variety of mediation, restorative justice, and conflict resolution techniques. She will be joined in conversation with my comrade Kempis Songster, also known as Ghani, who joined the CFSY in March of 2024 as CFSY's Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth, first Transformative Healing and Restorative Justice Manager. As the director of the THRJ Department, he is helping CFSY to advance transformative and healing justice models across the nation. He is a founder member of Right to Redemption, the Redemption Project, and the Coalition to Abolish Death by Incarceration. He is also co-founder and director of Ubuntu Philadelphia. Since his release in 2017, after 30 years In prison, starting when he was 15 years old, Ghani has emerged as an outspoken voice, a visionary in Philadelphia's movement to end mass human caging and to create transformative and restorative responses to harm and violence. Following their discussion, we will have 20 minutes of Q&A, which will be moderated by Jody Kent Levy, who is also a Stoneleigh Fellow with the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth. In this role, she is building political will for and seeking to expand the use and availability of restorative justice practices in cases of serious harm involving young people. As the founding executive director of the Campaign for Fair Sentencing of Youth, Jody was instrumental in building and implementing a national strategy to ban the condemnation of children to die in prison, or otherwise known as juvenile life without parole. I am Abdullah Wali Latif, formerly life sentence child condemned to die in prison, serving 31 years before released. I have my own experience, which I will reserve, that speaks to the importance of this issue and what it means to do sorry, what it means to have the right to redemption, what it means to heal and be a part of an instrument of healing for those who have experienced harm. But I will summarize my experience with 3 texts, one being that of Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, the second being Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy, the third being Lenora Anderson's In Their Name. And Just Mercy, undoing the new Jim Crow, which is mass incarceration, and doing justice as opposed to injustice in their names can never be possible, will not be possible until we reckon. With this, I introduce you to the author of Until We Reckon to join in conversation with Ghani Kempis Songster around ending harm, building beloved community, and finding ways to restore faith in each other and our right to redemption. Danielle, Ghani, a pleasure and an honor. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your conversation.
Much gratitude, Abdul Latif. I mean, Abdullah himself, you have a story and a voice that society might be all the better to hear. Having known you from under far from optimal conditions, being able to witness your strides and what you had to overcome to be here in this moment, make the introduction you gave all the more meaningful. It's no surprise that you've been able to make it to where you are now, brother, but receiving such a generous intro from you is no less surreal, and I'm even more honored. So, as would be said in the Arabic language, shukran jazilan, thank you very much, my brother.
Much love, I appreciate you, for sure.
Yeah. Well, Danielle, we have you for an hour and a half.
We have us for an hour and a half.
Right. So, and we're going to embrace this moment wholeheartedly. It's truly a blessing to be with you again, twice in 3 weeks, Danielle. And I'm still surfing the waves of Common Justice's spring social event. I was able to catch a glimpse of the healing community that Common Justice has been helping to consolidate, not just in New York City, but all around the country. I was able to see how important it is to create spaces of joy and celebration as much as it is to fundraise. You know what I mean? The way you addressed all of us that night at Spring Social, to the way you greeted and engaged each and every person in the space that night with a happiness and appreciation that like really could be felt. You know, thinking about how stony the road may have been at times over the years, perhaps even more so recently, I considered how much you and the Common Justice team deserved a moment of celebration and joy. You know, I also wondered about that journey, you know, the journey that you and your team had to take to get to that point, and what that was like. So yeah, Danielle, I'd just like to invite you to share a bit about your journey to restorative justice and the founding of Common Justice.
Thank you. What an incredibly generous introduction. Thank you. Um, Thank you all so much for being here. It's late. If you're anywhere near where I am, it's hot. There are a million demands on your attention. Like, we don't take lightly that you spend your time with us. So truly, truly thank you to everyone who's come out, including some dear friends who I'm excited to know are here in this space. Look, I really appreciate it, Abdullah, when you put us at a lakeside instead of a fireside. And immediately for me, I was at Lake Michigan in Chicago, where I grew up. And um, my journey to this started there, right? I'm roughly the same age as mass incarceration. Like, we were small at the same time. We're both really grown now. I hope it deteriorates a little faster than I do. Um, but I came of age as it did, right? As it started to like really emerge, like its death grip on communities, and particularly Black communities in Chicago. I was back and forth between white and Black communities growing up, and I could see the racial disparity that so many people have taught us about through data and other things since, but it was just like a lived experience of people disappearing and coming back worse for it. Um, I was offered mercy for the mistakes I made, and the young Black men I loved were not. And as that happened, I sort of understood the racism in the criminal legal system as someone who was the beneficiary of that inequity. And so I understood I'd have to find whoever was fighting it and join with them and fight until we won or I died, neither of which have happened. So I'm still here. Um, but I also, I was a survivor of violence. I committed harm, I survived harm. We kind of all did. Um, and as a survivor, I understood that none of that was for me. It wasn't for us. Like, of all the people I knew who were hurt, almost none of those things ended up in the criminal legal system. And when they did, people almost always felt worse for it. It never delivered the healing they sought. It never delivered the closure they sought. It didn't deliver even the safety they sought from it. And so I saw like whatever that thing was being done for, it wasn't for any of us who were hurt. And so this joint thing of understanding the racism, but understanding that the people in whose names it was being done were, if anything, being hurt more by it and certainly not helped, like made me curious about solutions. And the best solutions I saw were things that I would now call restorative justice, but I wouldn't call them that. And I don't think the people did them calling them that. Um, where they gathered people who were hurting each other in a room with each other and with someone with some moral authority to get them to talk one at a time. And they found a way for people to die less, right? Like, they found a way for people to kill each other less, to hurt each other less. And like, that's my lineage in this, right? Like, and their lineages were different, like some of their lineages were through practices that were important to them as part of like the Black Liberation Army. Some of them drew on indigenous roots. Some of them drew on like their West African roots for these practices. Some of them like made shit up that was somewhere inside them, not consciously and not passed down, but like passed in them. And I think um I say that because I think like I don't think restorative justice is new. I don't think anyone made it. I think it is at best a honing of a practice that is natural and innate to all of us. I also don't think having a critique of mass incarceration requires much analysis, really. It requires attention. Like, you look at its effects, and if you are someone who doesn't want more people to die, you end up rejecting prison because prison causes more people to die. It causes more pain than it ever alleviates. And so I really think the thing that you need to come to this is like you have to want to live. You have to want other people to live. Like at the risk of sounding corny, you have to love people. And if you love people, if you love people and you have an intellectual discipline, I don't know how you land anywhere else in the end. And so that's like my origin. And then I had the great blessing of finding people who would teach me when I was a fool, when I was full of myself, when I was distracted, when I was lost, like, and some of those are people like Dr. Fania Davis and Cheryl Graves, who's by that same lake, but also many others who aren't like in our field and known to us, but who created it. And then all these people at Common Justice who co-created the work. Every day, people co-created. And so um, I understand this much more as kind of an expression of our inherent capacity as people and then a process of fighting for the collective power to ensure that has the space to act and to breathe, as opposed to thinking about it as like the development of a practice. I don't think we develop it. I think we tear down the things in the way of it. And when we do that, it grows. And so I don't know if that's the kind of answer you want, but that's the kind I wanted to give on a hot Tuesday night. And then Ghani, I know so much about your story, and I have been
Mm.
so honored to be in it. I think about like the trip you made to my old office through Penn Station, um, and how important that was, all those places. And it's been just like extraordinary to be in relationship with you all this time. And so, but I would love to hear you share with the people here, like why you were drawn to restorative justice. I know you were the inaugural program manager at Philly's first restorative justice diversion program for youth. You sit on the board of Common Justice. Like what led you there? What did you get from that experience?
Mm. Thank you so much, Danielle. And everything, that answer you gave was exactly what I needed in this moment. Um, After my first 7 years in Trinidad and Tobago, from 1972 to 79, my next 8 years in Brooklyn, New York, mind you, um, doing well in school. And then my next 4 months as a runaway in Philadelphia, 250 miles away from home, selling cocaine out of fortified row homes associated with a gang and runaway children from other parts of the country, if you will. Um, when I entered prison after those 4 months, I didn't know I was being drawn to anything as a caged young person, but I guess I was, or maybe I was being pushed to something. Whatever the case, the fight with my self-accusing spirit um, had just begun, and I had chosen the path of erudition, um, self-education, as it were. I describe it as gorging myself on almost anything I could get my hands on to read. Rigorous scholarship behind prison walls helped me to develop, better writing, communication skills, helped me develop my analytical abilities. I developed a geopolitical analysis, even analysis on war. I studied everything from history to psychology to philosophy to neuroscience to social issues. I was able to build the muscle that I had come to believe real education is supposed to help a young person build, which was the distinct human ability to look deeply at society and the world, seeing what's unhealthy about it, what's anti-life about it, and then looking for ways to fix it. And so I developed my leadership voice, so to speak, in the prison. But my ability to come to terms with the role I had played in violence, come to terms with the role that I had played in this thing that I had developed an analysis and a critical voice on now, that was still undeveloped, So I started to feel unauthentic, outside the cell, in groups at organizational tables. I felt, a certain way, but in the cell, I still had to contend with my self-accusing spirit. you know. And so night after night, pacing the prison cell floor and sitting at the edge of the bunk, I had the same question. Um, how could I have done something so undoable? You know, how could I have committed such an irreparable harm? How could I have engaged in something that made me unrecognizable to my own mother and my own family? You know what I'm saying? I mean, they could not reconcile what they had learned that I had done with the son, the nephew, the grandson, the cousin, the friend that they knew. So something was missing in my quest for knowledge, or rather, I was missing something. And so um, it was when came across books and readings about restorative justice, but specifically about the Gacaca courts in post-genocide Rwanda. That's what I think was the first book I read when I read about what the Hutu genocidaires had to do when they stood before the Tutsi communities or Tutsi survivors who they had spent whose family members and loved ones they had spent 91 days, you know, murdering. They had to admit to what they did, apologize for what they did, and ask how could they atone. And I never, that kind of process was like foreign to me. You know what I mean? And then I started reading, but it was amazing. It was amazing to me. It caught my attention. I was like, what if we had something like that over here? And at the time, the Miller versus Alabama ruling had just came down, Danielle. And that was the ruling in 2012 where the U.S. Supreme Court said that people like me who were sentenced to die in prison for things that we did as children were on the verge of being resentenced and possibly released. And so hundreds of us were on the verge of being released to the community en masse. And I wasn't hearing anything about how ready was the community to receive us. You know what I mean? And so I thought about what I was reading in the Gacaca courts, about the Gacaca courts, and was fascinated about the thought of a model like that over here. What if we could um, face the community and own up for what we had done? You know, when we're arrested, Danielle, the first thing we're told by the courts is anything you say can and will be used against you. And so truth telling is the first one of the pillars of accountability, one of the pillars of beginning the road to fulfilling your obligations for the harm you've caused. And one of the pillars of healing is dissuaded by the system, you know? And so that made my struggle to get to this point so much harder, you know, because I went about the business of reinventing myself, thinking that it's enough to develop a political analysis, adopting a religion, you know what I mean? But but it wasn't until I started reading about restorative justice and, like I said, learning about Ubuntu and particularly the Gacaca courts that I realized that I had more to do to become a whole person. You know what I'm saying? To regain my humanity and moral rectitude. It was more than just developing an analysis and being able to write better essays and being a leader in the prison context. I had to come to terms with the gaping hole that I left in the lives of a family. You know what I mean? And so on and so forth. And so I started Ubuntu Philadelphia from behind the walls with the help of some people on the outside. And when I came home, some folks that was aware of my work with Ubuntu Philadelphia, um, the Amistad Law Project, which is a grassroots abolitionist legal collective and organizing project, they came up with my family to welcome me as I walked out of Greater Ford Prison. 2 months later, they gave me a job as their first healing justice organizer. I worked with them for 3 years, and then Sarah Morris, who worked with the youth, who's the ED of the Youth Art and Self-Empowerment Project, approached me and let me know that YASP was about to be the home of Philadelphia's first restorative justice diversion program for youth, and they wanted me to be the program manager. I didn't know why they wanted me, but they thought that I could, you know, serve the position well. Well, the program launched May 21st, and we decided to name it Healing Futures, and we received our first case in June of May 21st, 2021, by the way, Danielle. And that's how I joined
Yeah.
Healing Futures.
Can you, I mean, you've offered so much in this, but I wonder, even to back up one step to what you were
Mhm.
talking about,
Mhm.
um, in finding a pathway to repair, right? And understanding that there is something more than just your personal development. There's this other thing that has to do with making right. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you could dig in more there and talk about like why do you believe using a restorative justice approach to harm offers a more meaningful possibility of real accountability? And why is that so important?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Danielle. I think what we call restorative justice, because the way it creates space for everyone to exercise agency, which is something that no one has in the court process and the carceral outcome. It creates meaningful opportunities or opens up pathways to real accountability, which is the exercising of one's desire and agency to repair the harm as much as possible. And Danielle, it's deep that your question puts it in terms of offering um, possibilities to real accountability. Because for me, accountability is an achievement. It is something that you attain to, something you and everyone accomplish together or individually. It's important because of the doing sorry piece. The whole piece about harm or crime or violations of a person's humanity creating guilt or blame, but creating obligations. That piece and accountability being about actively addressing your obligations, right? Fulfilling your debt to a person that you've harmed and really truly centering the needs of survivors. The state's definition of accountability, I was able to see from behind prison walls, which is an incorrect definition, is about making sure that the law is upheld, right? And not that the person harmed, having their sense of safety, belonging, purpose in the community be supported. I I could be in that prison cell and never be apologetic, never be remorseful, right? But according to the state, I'm being held accountable, right? And so I reject that notion that incapacitation or punishment amounts to accountability, because I believe that accountability it has to arise from inside the individual, and it's the person exercising their agency to bring balance back as much as they could in areas where their actions may have left in a state of imbalance. And so that's why I believe restorative justice is ideal or more so than the carceral approach, for opening up those pathways to real accountability, because it creates space for everyone involved, not just the responsible party, but also for the harmed party to have agency, to get their hands back on the steering wheel of their lives and their healing journey. Now, Danielle, was that uh, answer what you were looking for?
Beautiful. Thank you.
Danielle, you said accountability, though, offers more to healing than punishment ever will. Why is that? Why do you say that? And what is accountability in your view?
I mean, so much of what you said, of course, resonates, right? That accountability is this thing that is rooted in and therefore requires the dignity and agency of the person making things right, right? And so
Mhm.
if we know repair requires the dignity and agency of the person to make things right, then a system that diminishes that dignity and agency, that aims to eradicate it, is also eradicating that capacity for repair. And for survivors, like survivors want repair, right? Like we want to know the person won't do it again. And we want to know we won't go through it again, and we want to know no one else will go through what we went through. And if we're honest, we know prison cannot deliver either of those things, because if it did, we would not have been hurt in the first place. It's not theoretical for us. Like we live in a world where police and prisons are omnipresent, and we were hurt anyway. Like it's just like the most fundamental lived truth in it. And there's other things we want in our healing too. Like we want to ask why. We want to say, why me? We want to say, fuck you. We want to understand, was it a real gun? What if I'd fought back? What if I hadn't fought back? Like, did you think this about me? Did you see that? Did you say this? Were you the one who, like, and we want to say, like, this is the effect you had on me, on my family, on my loved ones. And we want to say, this is what you owe. This is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to suffer. This is what I want you to be that is beautiful, like all of it all at once. And
Yeah.
there's nothing in the criminal legal system that gives us that, right? Like 97% of cases are resolved by plea. The ones that do go to trial, it's like the least possible trauma-informed approach to grill somebody about their experience of pain in a public forum where your job is to poke holes in their stories. Like that's a defense attorney's job, but it's a horrific thing to have happen as a survivor. Like those places are continuously re-traumatizing. And they all open a door to punishment, but that's not accountability. And I say this all the time. I say punishment is passive, right? It's done to you. But like what you're talking about, like when you're talking about the agency of it, the power of it, like accountability is active. You do it. At Common
That's right.
Justice, we think it has 5 steps. You acknowledge what you did, acknowledge its impact, express genuine remorse, make things as right as possible, ideally in a way defined by those harmed, and become someone who won't cause that harm ever again. Like those are not, prison is not built for any of those things, right? And in fact, interferes in countless places. But those are things that are not just transformative for the person who has caused harm, but transformative for the person who has been hurt. It means a great deal to hear you didn't deserve it, it wasn't your fault. But there's no one hearing that from is more impactful than the person who caused the pain in the first place.
That's right. That's right.
And it means everything to be able to say, this is what I want you to do to make it right and to have someone keep those promises to you. It doesn't undo what happens. It's not a time machine. It's not meant to make everyone in the room love each other. It's also not a dating app. Like it's
Mhm.
a process for repair. And I think I'm obsessed with repair, right? Like I'm obsessed with it. And we have so few examples of it in our day-to-day lives. We have letting things go, we have forgiving, we have vengeance, we have grudges, we have apologies, we have all these things kind of around, we have punishment, impunity, but repair, like someone who hurt us is like, what can I do to make it right? And we say, you take these actions and then they do it. Some of us can't think of one time we've experienced it in ways. If I say, think of a time someone did something was punished, we can think of something from that week. Think of a time someone did something, got away with it, we can think of something from that hour. And yet this other thing is almost nowhere. And it is so elemental to who we are, to what we need when we've been hurt. And is at the cornerstone of healing. Like at the end of the day, trauma distills down to powerlessness, so that the opposite of trauma isn't help. The opposite of trauma is power. And in these processes, everyone is exercising power, right? The responsible party is exercising power in the service of repair. The harm party is exercising power in shaping what comes out of this thing that they could not stop. Um, and that, I mean, that's the kind of thing, whether you're looking through a political lens, an emotional lens, a spiritual lens, a clinical lens, all of it lines up on the sign of healing in ways none of the practices we know in courts do.
Question, Danielle. When you have some folks that might say restorative justice is like a forgive my victimizer agenda or a kind of process. What would you say to that person? And is there a role for forgiveness in restorative justice? And does repairing the harm require forgiveness?
In my view, absolutely not.
Mhm.
Absolutely not. Like we talk at Common Justice about forgiveness as the F word. Like I'd much rather hear fuck than forgiveness. Like if the other person doesn't say it. And both of them, I'm like, both of them are words you should probably let the other person say first. I've seen extraordinary examples of forgiveness. They are beautiful to behold. Um, they're completely unnecessary. They're completely unnecessary. Mercy is unnecessary. Um, like I think it matters a lot. I will say it matters a lot what we mean by forgiveness. I think forgiveness is a deeply personal thing. For some people, it is between them and their God. But for some people, it's like a deeply spiritual practice. For some people, it is a liberating practice. For some people, they feel obligated to do it. People relate to it very different ways and mean very different things by it. Um, I think there's a huge misconception that in order to want something like restorative justice, you have to care for the other person. You don't. You have to care for yourself. Like 90% of people offered common justice, of survivors offered to choose it for the person who hurt them. And that is not because they're overwhelmingly merciful. It's because we ask them to think of we're like, what do you want to see come out of all of this? And they make a list. And we're like, which of those things do you get if this person's in prison? And which do you get if you do common justice? And 90% of the time, they get more of the things they want for themselves if they do common justice. People can do it out of like extraordinary pragmatism. And I don't like the idea that pragmatism is somehow less beautiful than these other things. Being able to like feel revenge, a desire for revenge, which is a legitimate thing to feel, and choose a thing that will keep you and others safe, that's an act of enormous love, right? It means you're deciding that like your love for yourself and your love for others exceeds your desire for revenge. And to know those things can all coexist, they can cohabitate. You don't have to eliminate the part of you that wants to see the person suffer, the part of you that is ambivalent. Like all of that can coexist as long as you decide, like, I want to do the thing that will work. Like if you just decide my lens here is I'm going to do the thing that will work, that will keep me safe and keep others safe. And you don't have to come to that with mercy. We have a lot of participants who are like, I want to be the one to tell this person what to do, who want them to suffer in a variety of ways. And some of them were like, that's not on the table. But the suffering that comes from always having to do a thing you didn't want to do that day is on the table. The suffering that comes from having to be continuously reminded of a thing is on the table. And then this other thing that emerges once people have power, which is actually a desire to see that other person thrive. But you don't have to do that out of forgiveness and mercy. You can do it simply because you know that if they thrive, they won't hurt anyone else again, and that will be meaningful to you in itself. And so I think I was like, this isn't a dating app. I think we talk about too many of the stories we hear about restorative justice. People embrace each other like brothers. They're inviting the people who killed their children to Thanksgiving dinner. That's extraordinary. It is not necessary. It is not necessary. All we have to do to want these solutions instead of prison is to want to be safe, to want our neighbors to be safe. That's all we have to want to land here. And we get to have the whole range of human emotions in the way, like as we make that choice. We don't have to eliminate them to make it. And so I'm so glad you asked it because I'm obsessed with this. And I think it closes the door to so many people who would otherwise support restorative justice. If they feel like there is a certain philosophical or moral requirement that they care deeply about that other person from the outset. Um, and and I think there's 1,000 ways into this, and that all of those are good and all of those are worthy.
And Daniel, I don't think forgiveness is required to share a responsibility to make sure that the harm that happened doesn't happen to someone else. I think that's where,
Absolutely.
we can find solidarity on, and through this process is realizing that, look, whether we've been harmed or caused harm or community members who have been indirectly harmed, we all have a responsibility to make sure that violence and victimization is not the norm in our communities, right? I was going to ask you too, Daniel, about the doing sorry piece. What does it look like to do sorry? Because this is a term that I first heard from you. What does it look like to do sorry in cases of serious harm? Why do you focus on these types of cases, for instance, right? And can you give a concrete example from the work at Restoring Justice of doing sorry?
Yeah. In full transparency, I am trying to answer a question in the chat, and I shouldn't be doing that.
It's
I'm so
okay.
excited to be able to answer
I
one.
mean, if that question,
Yeah, I'm like, look, it can wait. See, so yes, like at Common Justice, we run an alternative to prison for serious violence. We get cases through the courts with consent of the district attorney and the survivor. When the survivor consents, the person responsible enters a 15-month intervention. They see us 5 days a week. The first 3 months, they're seeing us daily. They go through an intensive curriculum about violence intervention and reduction. About 3 months in, they sit with the person they've harmed, where they do those 5 steps. They acknowledge what happened, they acknowledge its impact. We reach agreements. 100% of our circles have resulted in agreements 2 this week alone. And they spend the next year completing those agreements, completing the curriculum. If they're successful in that, the felony charges against them are vacated and they don't go to prison. And meanwhile, we provide wraparound services to the people they harmed, to support them in coming through what happened to them and in their lives generally. We do this in cases like stabbings, shootings, gunpoint robberies, crimes of real violence with real lasting impact for people. We have had just over 8% of our participants terminated on our watch for new crimes. In a 10-year study from 2012 to 2022, the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services found only one of our program graduates had been reconvicted of a new violent crime, and that was technically the possession of a gun, not the use of it. And it works for all the reasons we all just described, right? Like it's like that, it works because it enhances people's agency and dignity, because it holds people to extraordinarily high standards and gives them a way to meet them. And because it creates like a real pathway to repair. And so that's what it looks like in the day-to-day of our work, and has for, since 2009 now.
Wonderful, Danielle. Thank you so much. That's some really, really serious work there. And it's great to see that model spreading across the country. But I didn't know that Common Justice actually handled gun-related cases
Yeah, we
too.
always have. Like one of our
Instead.
first ones was gun
Wow.
related. I mean, and
Yeah.
we started with violence. Like, and I think there's a lot of people who think like we start with lower level things and you can work your way up and build trust. I don't know any instances of that actually happening, right? Like there's a way that there is a mentality, both legitimate and illegitimate, but some of it is legitimate, that there's a difference between low-level cases and more serious ones. So even people who built extraordinary track records on lower level cases, that didn't create a crossover to the more serious ones. In the same way, many people had extraordinary outcomes with juveniles, didn't create an appetite to cross over into the adult system. And so when I planned Common Justice, I looked for any instance of that kind of incremental moving up, and there wasn't one anywhere. And so I was like, well, if that doesn't work, if the best of the best do it beautifully and it doesn't elevate, right? You can't get more serious, then let's just start where we want to be. But there's also a way that I think restorative justice is it's fine for low-level things, but it's great for serious harm, right? Like restorative justice is wildly proportionate. Like what comes out of it is very proportionate to the impact, which may or may not have a proportionate relationship to the charge, right? Like to your point, we're interested in harm to people, not broken laws. And so, but it's wildly proportionate. And so it brings you face to face with the human impact of what you've done. If that human impact is low, it makes that clear to you, which is why restorative justice for low-level cases is like, like you did a
Yeah.
thing, you thought it was no big
Mhm.
deal, you have a confirmation that it was no big deal. Like it doesn't, whereas like the gas in the engine of it is the seriousness of it. It's the pain caused, and so the more that's there, the farther it goes, like the more it can do. Like it's like a very powerful medicine. Like you wouldn't give someone chemotherapy for the common cold, right? Like it's not called for in the same way. And it's called for in these other things. And so it was our judgment, both in our assessment of restorative justice, but also in our assessment of how politics and power were operating, that we should just start doing what we wanted to do instead of start doing something other than we wanted to do and beg our way there.
Wow. What about the intensity of the program, Danielle? You meet with responsible parties pretty often. Why such an engaged and involved process?
I mean, I think we understand many of our participants, like they've caused very serious harm. a handful of our participants, it's like an absolute outlier event that explained by really extreme circumstances that if those circumstances are resolved, nothing will happen again. But many of our participants have survived more violence than anyone should, seen more violence than anyone should, committed more violence than anyone should. And like this is the case that brought them to us, right? But it exists in a context of structural violence, of interpersonal violence, of them as both the givers and receivers of that harm. And it takes work and time to shift that. Like we talk about violence all the time. Like, where did you learn it? How does it feel? Like, why do you do it? How does it serve you? What does it get you? What else can get you that? If it's the only way you know to be safe, how else can you be safe? Like, how can we figure that out together? And so, Common Justice in many ways is a violence intervention program that uses restorative justice as opposed to just a restorative justice program for violence, right? Like,
Mhm.
the restorative justice process is a centerpiece of it. It's transformative, but there are a ton of other drivers of violence in people's lives. And those relate to their economic stability, to their housing. It relates to their own healing, to their identity, their self-love, their relationships, their belonging, all these other things. And circles don't do all of that. Circles are amazing, but they don't do all of it. And so um, the rigor of it is designed to be the lightest possible touch that we can engage someone in and be confident they won't cause harm ever again. And it's designed to disrupt their daily lives. It's designed to create tension, like to create tension between things as they have been and things as they could be, and to make it hard to keep doing things as they have been, and to create um, the kind of generative tension that can move someone toward something else, like toward a different way of being.
Hmm. Wow, Danielle. So much to think about there. I know when we were doing well, they're still doing Healing Futures, we realized, quite early that the rabbit hole under each harm runs deep. You know, that was one of the things I took away, and I learned very, very quickly from doing that program, very early in the process, what some of the young people, we learned what some of the young people had been enduring for much of, if not their entire young lives, while not excusing them of the harm they caused. It might never have happened were it not for multiple crises converging in their lives. And so the process or the curriculum that we thought about for the young people in the program had to be intense. It had to be very involved and engaged, but not intense in a way to make it difficult for them, but intense that to, like you said, create the tensions that kind of like motivate some reflection. You know what I
Yeah, I mean,
mean?
everyone who
And some
really
deeper
loves you,
considerations.
like everyone who's really loves you has told you about yourself at least once. And
Hmm.
everyone who really
Hmm.
loves you think you can be better than you've been. Like the people who really love you aren't
Always.
just like every day being like another perfect day from you. Like that's not what love looks like. Like love
Right.
includes seeing that someone can do something other than what they've done, can be something other than what they've been, and pushing back on any stories that deny that. And so I think there's a way that we think that rigor and intensity is somehow like harmful or not caring, and that caring is like just permissive, but that's not in our real experience. If we like really look to the places we have felt most love, they're not usually they're not singularly permissive spaces, right? Like they're spaces where people hold us to a standard they believe we can meet and support us in meeting that standard, right? Like they also give us what we need to rise to it. And and we don't pretend that our participants are not likely to hurt others without a meaningful change, right? Like we can be honest about that and still believe unequivocally in them, right? Like we can be honest that somebody who has committed violence countless times is likely to do it again unless something is different. And that um, our job is to get in there as quickly as we can into their lives, and walk with them as they try and do something else. But I want to ask this
Some,
question sort of
some,
back. Okay, I
you were
wanted
going
to
to
ask the
ask me a
question back
question?
to you. Yeah. But it relates it like, you know, I'm interested just as a practitioner, if you can talk about like where have you seen restorative justice break cycles of violence? Like that's what you do in your work. Like how have you seen that happen? What does it look like? What makes it possible?
Yeah, in the restorative, thanks for that question, Danielle. In the processes um, I've been involved in, with Healing Futures and otherwise, and that my fellow practitioners have been involved in, I've rarely, if ever, seen a responsible person engage um, in or cause another violent harm. Not saying that it doesn't happen, but it's not something that normally happens. I'm not saying that RJ is a cure-all either, and I know you're not saying that because it's not, and it's some type of panacea. But what I do know, for instance, is that for instance, Healing Futures experienced its first reoffense almost 4 years and 40 plus cases after the program was launched. So what's that
That's
about
better than us.
that's about what, 2.5%. One of the very first cases involved a group of teenagers attacking a young woman on a city hall train platform, for instance, right, Daniel? And one boy who was referred to Healing Futures was asked by the person who he harmed directly to his face in the circle process. She asked him to volunteer for an organization that helps people to heal from violence for 6 months. So he did so. He became an ambassador for the youth committee of that organization, did neighborhood cleanups with other youths, and was even caught, unbeknownst to him, marching on 52nd Street in Philly against gun violence. That boy went on to graduate from high school last year with honors and has his eyes on college. In another situation, two boys, one responsible for the harm and another one who received the harm, embraced accountability together. Um, Exchanged apologies face to face in a circle process, and even agreed to do their restorative plan together. The plan involved them doing food distribution to people in need every weekend with a community organization. And the boys were able to repair their relationship to each other and to their community. And now are spokespeople for restorative justice and want to be trained in practitioner. And you've seen this kind of outcome in with common justice, I imagine. But I definitely have seen over and over again cases where young people who engaged in violent acts choose a different path after restorative justice because of what the process awakened for in them. A deeper appreciation for their role in the community, realizing that they do have agency, and probably the most important part of accountability is not just accounting for your past actions, but accounting for what you have the capacity to do in the future. You know what I mean? It's a ultimate one of the most important steps to maturity. And I've had young people that went through the healing justice, restorative justice process tell me that. Say, listen, man, I really appreciate you, hammering in this idea of accountability because I think it's a beautiful concept. I feel so much more, so much stronger, so much more mature, from taking this path with you, and I appreciate your support. And I think that's the main piece to support, that they feel supported and they feel loved and they feel guided, you know what I mean, through the process. And so, yeah, the I've definitely seen through these processes, Danielle, how it breaks cycles of violence.
And can you talk about how that looks like different in cases of more serious harm? Like what's
Mhm.
more challenging about them? What's more powerful about them? Like how do those differ from the cases where the harm is less significant?
When I left Healing Futures, for instance, I left with no experience with doing cases other than burglaries, um, felony thefts, aggravated assaults, and so on and so forth. Felony ones, twos, and misdemeanor ones, lower level offenses. Yet and still, when I was invited a week after joining CFSY, the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, I was invited to participate in the facilitation of a double homicide case. And I was able to take those experiences that I learned at Healing Futures and co-facilitate a process for a double homicide case. And I think, Daniel, it was actually, I felt more equipped to deal with that case than the lower level case because of my own experience as somebody that caused a similar harm. When talking to the young persons that was involved in that case, they were able to relate to me, you know, because I knew, the experience of causing an irreparable harm, and I was able to build trust with them, just on that strength, like they were able to see in me what accountability for something so serious can look like, what transformation can look like, right? And it was not something, and it was something that appealed to them. And they were able to confide things in me about why they did what they did and so on and so forth. And so, as opposed to lower level cases, I don't know what it was, but when dealing with the homicide cases, I felt like I was more equipped. Not just I was more equipped, but what I learned from doing restorative justice with the other cases had equipped me to address. And like I tell the young people, it's like I'm stepping out of a time machine, looking at my younger self and addressing my younger self and having a conversation with my younger self that I wish somebody had had with me when I was on the verge of doing something reprehensible and that would rob me of my freedom and my life for the next 30 years. And so, yeah, Daniel, I definitely, I don't know what it is, but for me, restorative justice feels more suitable to addressing cases of serious harms because those cases seem to be in more need of healing and more in need of a deeper sense of accountability with bigger obligations to fulfill. And
Yeah.
young people might not know where to start to begin to be accountable for something so serious,
Yeah.
right? But they can see in me that it can start somewhere and it can have a positive outcome.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it really resonates, and it makes me think about like all the sort of critiques of restorative justice is like soft on crime.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm like anyone who has been in these processes, no, there are very few things harder than facing the impact of what we've done. Like facing the people we've impacted. I mean, like you think about the third time you were late to someone you respect. And everybody on this meeting knows like you have considered lying. You consider being like the train was delayed or traffic this when you know full well you just like left the house with less time than it took to get where you were going. Like it's hard to be honest about that. That's nothing. Like it is so difficult to truly face the impact of what we've done. It demands so much of us. It is so difficult to every day uphold a commitment. Like our people see us every day. Anyone who's tried to diet, to quit something, to exercise, to anything knows like actually suddenly taking on a daily commitment and sustaining it for more than a year is extremely difficult to do. Like, and it's difficult to do even when we're fully resourced to do it in every way, right? Like, even if you can pay for a personal trainer, you're still canceling some people. It's so hard to do that. It is so hard to actually do the work of figuring out how to be in the world differently, like to be in the world without causing harm when all the models you have for being safe include violence, like at some level. And to be the person who can be the first of your group of people to do something different is extraordinarily difficult. It's extraordinarily hard to break off the relationships that you can't sustain while still living a life of nonviolence, right? And that's sometimes you have relationships that support you changing and people who will roll with you even if they're still in it. And sometimes you have to leave whole people, communities behind. And if you're lucky in a program and you land into a different belonging, but it is still incredibly difficult to not do that. And it's hard to like just like the agreements we have are exhausting. They're time consuming. They're not some of them are transformative and interesting, and some are very much things people don't want to do. Like they're arduous and they demand like all of someone's energy. And on a human level, it is so much harder to face and tell the truth than to just kind of sit there and defend yourself and be punished and count down the clock. And so I think the notion that it's soft on crime is ridiculous. But I also think it's so silly that we assume like soft on crime is bad. Like I don't actually think it's soft, but I'm like, I don't, hard and soft are weird lenses. I'm interested
Totally.
in effective and ineffective. Like I think the thing that it brings home to me
Hmm.
all the time when it's like hard and soft say nothing about outcome.
That's
Like
right.
there's nothing related to outcome in those terms. And they're like you throw a little adjective on, it doesn't matter. They're not outcomes oriented. I think the thing that would most transform our criminal legal system is if we decided we would only respond to violence with things that reduce violence. If we're like, we're only going to do in response to violence something that reduces violence, that's going to be our standard. It doesn't sound radical. It doesn't sound blue. It doesn't sound left. It doesn't sound whatever. And it would upend everything from policing to bail to courts to sentencing to parole, all of it. Like it would upend everything if we just said, like, actually, we have to do what works. And I think the
Yeah.
longer I've done this work, it has become clear to me that the one non-negotiable in this country is revenge. It's not safety. It's revenge. And we will give up, our criminal legal system will give up safety for revenge. We will do prison, which is demonstrably criminogenic, where people who go are likelier to commit harm than people who get away with it. Like it creates violence. We will do that instead of anything else so that we can get our pound of flesh and not even our own pound of flesh, like our pound of flesh in someone else's
Mhm.
name
That's
who
right.
didn't even take our call or show to grand jury or come to trial or ask us to do it. And for me, I'm like, I want our non-negotiable to be safety, not revenge. I want us to say, like, that's what we're here to produce. And we can feel a desire for revenge, but just because we feel it doesn't mean we should embed it in every single one of our practices at the expense of every single person who will subsequently suffer terrible harm because we wanted to satisfy that hunger rather than do something that works.
Effectiveness or ineffectiveness. Imagine if that was the calculus,
Like, what if we
you
just
know.
want things that work? And that's why survivors who are furious, who would love to bury the person under their own house, will choose it because what they want is to be safe. We just want to be safe. We
Mhm.
want our neighbors to be
Mhm.
safe. We want to stop burying our friends. We want to stop going to our neighbors' children's funerals. Like, we just want to be safe. We want to walk down the street and trust that whatever's coming behind us isn't coming for us. Like, that's all any of us want. And so it's like, and we know things that produce it. There are countless things that produce it. We could have all of it. We could have all of them if we built the political will.
I remember you saying one time, Danielle, that actually the court process or the criminal legal process, it's not hard. It's actually hard on the person, but soft on crime because it lets the person off the hook. Was that the way you put it? It
I
lets the
mean, you
person
don't, like
off
in
the hook.
prison, you don't have to face what you did.
That's right.
You don't have
That's
to
right.
admit it. You don't have to tell the truth. You don't have to do sorry. You don't have to face anything.
Yeah.
And so if those things are important and they're associated with healing, like why aren't we insisting on that? Like why aren't those the things we say are non-negotiables instead of suffering in a cage where someone else hurts you? Um, I
Yeah.
know we're moving soon to
Mhm. Question and answer.
Q&A,
Mhm.
but I want to ask you, like, I mean, we're all here in this wild moment in this country. Um, and I wonder, can you talk from your perspective about why this work is so important in the current landscape? Like, what's the end game to this work? What's the end game to this work? Like, what's your vision for where this takes us?
Yeah, Daniel, I've been, when doing Healing Futures, one of the things that I found myself at this point where I visualized young people on this conveyor belt being fed into a furnace, in the city. And, you know, me and our little team of no more than four people, while we might have been able to snatch one person off here and one young person or one kid off of here, we then had to, for every young person that we were able to snatch off the conveyor belt, we had to watch hundreds, maybe thousands go by into the furnace. you know. And so I wondered, how effective we were being really. Are we really making a difference? You know, I know we were changing the lives of some young people, and who knows how many lives they could then impact. But what are we really doing? And that forced me to look at the long term, at the long vision. Continue doing this work with the long vision in mind. And the long vision is where we can actually spread this model. We could spread this model, find real pathways to community referrals, right? Where we're not depending entirely on the criminal legal system, be it the district attorney's office, the courts, or the probation office to refer cases, but the community can refer cases to any number of community-based organizations doing this work in the city. You know what I mean? That's actually doing this work to to reduce violence, to create healthier and safer communities, and to transform the conditions also that's generating the violence, right? My that's my vision, and all to have more community-based organizations doing restorative justice, transformative justice, healing justice works, and the community is referring the cases more to us, kind of like what they're doing out there in St. Louis with the Freedom Community Center. They're doing such magnificent work out there with the community. We went out there together, in fact, Daniel. And I was so inspired by what Mike Milton and them are doing out there, the community referring cases to them, and then they organize around the case and leverage the community power in the legal process and have charges diverted. If we can continue to do this work and expand and deepen the healing justice community, like you say, bend political will, and also have this fight to open the criminal legal process up to more restorative processes, and see that fight as, like you said in one of your pieces, as crucial to the fight for our democracy.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? That's crucial to me. Right now in Philadelphia, we're working on a restorative dialogue for youth homicide pilot. Um, Hopefully we can, maybe sometime in the foreseeable future, have restorative dialogues included on the menu of options for how cases of homicides involving youth are treated. If we can replicate that, if that can work, and then send signals to municipalities all around the country, and where it becomes the norm, where restorative justice is not looked at as fringe, but as the norm, and it becomes kind of like what Ruth Wilson Gilmore said when she said abolition is about presence, not absence. It's about building life affirming institutions. If we can institutionalize this work, and I know it's institutionalized, it's kind of like, it might make folks bristle, but I mean, if we can like really expand this work and make it the norm and have it working more broadly, and get the community more involved, and the community demanding restorative justice and doing more community referrals, that would be a great vision to achieve in my view. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I see all of that. I see we've been doing all this work integrating these practices with community violence interruption practices. So like I see a continuity. The criminal legal system has a perfect continuity from police to prosecution to prison. And our practices that we're cultivating ever don't have that same continuity. And I see us building that. I see us building it relationship. And I think it matters so much in this moment because I think we said this at the start, but like we're talking about an affirmative vision. We're talking about building a thing that can work. And the overwhelming sentiment in this country, if there is like any point of unity, it's that the status quo sucks. Like
Yes.
87 million people didn't vote. Is that the number? Almost 90 million didn't vote at all. Um, I say like quite sincerely that if like nope had been on the ballot, it would have won with a landslide, right? It would have had those 90 million plus half of the people who voted Republican and half who voted Democrat. Internationally, in this last election, it was the first time in modern history that every Western democracy ousted its incumbent party. So there have been years that have
Mm.
gone left and years that have gone right. But this year, everyone was just like, not this, not this. And I think we are too much like relating to this crisis, where we see that things cannot be what they've been, right? Like I think we can feel it ending, right? We can feel something ending, and endings often feel scary and are scary and come with a ton of loss. Like I'm not minimizing the enormous loss that's already happened and the enormous loss will come. But I also want to say, like, our opposition are so good at treating crisis as opportunity, right? As a way of absorbing new people, of building and consolidating power. And we still often treat crisis as a disruption to our plans. Um, but I'm like, if the one thing we will never be is whatever we just were, great. Like the status quo wasn't our shit anyway,
That's right.
right? Like, that's not what we were here for. Like we know it isn't what is needed, what it should be. And so, like Jumani Williams said this beautiful thing at Mamdani's inauguration here in New York and at his own, like when he was reelected as public advocate, and he said, you know, these times are crazy. It feels like anything is possible. And so anything is possible, right? And so I think we are in a time where the range of what could happen is the widest it has been in my lifetime. And my hope is that those of us that are on the side of all of this, that are on the side of human dignity, of beloved community, of all of radical love, of safety, of justice, see that like the range of what we can do is the closest it has been to limitless since we have been alive. And so, like, let's fucking go.
Let's go, Danielle. Let's go. I
That
see you,
is
Jody.
beautiful. I am so hesitant to interrupt this brilliant dialogue among these two luminaries and friends. But this has been such a rich conversation, and I know we have a lot of questions coming in from the audience, and I want to bring those questions to y'all before we close out in about 15 minutes. So, a couple things that have come through, some practical questions. About, how do you bring about the change that you're trying to bring about that are embedded patterns and mindsets to reorient someone to a new way of being? And I think this is a question for Danielle. What sorts of sources does your curriculum draw from? Wondering because so many of these ways of thinking are so ingrained. I feel like a similar sort of question gets at like, how did we end up here? Was this prison system really built from a hunger for revenge and suffering, or a system that uses it for mass control and oppression and revenge or safety? So I feel like, getting into the roots of white supremacy with the system we have, recognizing that. I know that that informs your approach, and I'm curious if you could share, from these great questions, how the curriculum is built and how it's so different from, what we have now.
Beautiful. I'm so grateful for the question about white supremacy because absolutely yes. Like, thank you so much for saying this out loud because I don't want to give the impression that the purpose of the system is an emotional one, right? Like the purpose of the system is securing control, is exercising control over Black and Brown people and people who would align with them, right? It's always been in the service of control, in the service of profit, in the service of power. And and then I think it draws on the human desire for revenge, which normally passes if you let it breathe. Like if you feel it, it usually goes. It draws on that and enshrines that in policy, right? And so, um, and that desire to revenge and to punish is elevated to extraordinary levels when it's combined with racism and white supremacy, right? Like the revenge that we will seek against a Black man who hurts a white woman is unmatched, right? And so also understanding those things are, they're not fully separate, right? They move together in culture and they activate and reactivate one another over and over again. But yes, I don't think it's just serving an emotional function. But I think in the culture and why people support it so much, and so many people who would not buy into something that was explicitly framed as being about the control of people of color, can buy into it through this other thing. And there, I mean, we could talk for 1,000 hours about our curriculum. It's so cool. But there's only one thing I really want to say. I mean, we read a lot of what we could read. There wasn't much out there on violence. There was great youth development stuff and other stuff, but there wasn't a lot on transforming violence when we designed it. And the thing I want to say about our curriculum, it is all questions, all inquiry based. We only ask questions. And it's because we believe people have in them the insight, the capacity to make different meaning of what they've experienced, what they've seen, what is true. We believe they've seen it enough in the world to understand the world if you give them a sort of structure to think about it well. And so, I mean, some of that's because we work mostly with adolescents, and no adolescent has ever changed their mind by being told something. Adolescents don't believe what you say, but they believe what they say. So if you ask them questions, like they'll do it. But that's true for a lot of us. It's true for a lot of adults. One way you can track this is if you ask someone who had a heated argument and you're like, what happened? They're like, well, and I told him, and then they quote themselves. And then they don't quote the other person. like it's just like next time you hear someone talking about a heated exchange, even if it's like road rage, listen for it. It's like very sad about all of us as people. And so we ask questions. And in the course of answering them, of grappling with them, like people are transformed by their own reflection, not by information or anything that we pour into them. And then we developed thinking about that national level, we developed a narrative change practice and curriculum also rooted in questions. We're saying like, what if instead of trying to find like the perfect tweet or the perfect message that will change everyone's lived experience about violence and all the cultural inputs, like what if we ask the right questions? Like what if we ask questions that help people surface and understand differently the things they have seen and known? And so I'll share a link to that the host can pass to the whole group. I don't have permission to write to everyone, just in case I go wild. But I'll put it there, and it'll come to you in a second. But I think the thing I most want to say about the curriculum is that all the content comes from our participants, and it's always enough.
Thanks, Danielle.
That's beautiful.
Ghani, there's a question in here about how to help young people believe that restoration is possible. I would love to hear your answer to that, especially given that the concept of having this opportunity to apologize is so foreign to the traditional system and the system that is so dominant. It's hard to imagine another way, right? So how especially for our young people who've been ravaged by this system. So how do you, in your work, how have you come to work with young people so that they believe that restoration is possible?
Yeah, when working with the young people, first of all, the way I see their actions or the way I interpreted what they were referred to us for, um, I make sure that they get that clearly, that I see the harm that they caused not as the problem, but the results of the problem. You know what I mean? Their behaviors were their responses to the harms that had been happening to them. I realized that restorative justice can't be some new method, no matter how holistic, for fixing our children. So they know from the door that I'm not in the business of trying to fix them. That's what's needed to be fixed, is the world that they're being brought into and forced to grow up in. So I come at them, letting them know I'm not approaching them with any judgment, that actually I'm approaching them with awe, in awe of what they had to endure. Because judgment never lets you get past the behavior, but awe, helps you to appreciate the root causes of the behavior. And not that I'm excusing a young person at all, because we let the young person know that you have agency. There are influences in your life, but you have the capacity, or you can develop the capacity to resist those influences and chart your own course. You know what I mean? And so just being able to let them know that they have the power, that they have the power to choose a higher destiny, to claim their highest destiny by making choices consistent with the things that they're good at. You know, we've asked them about the things that they're good at, what they like doing. You know what I mean? And then, encourage them to think differently about, well, what if you had made some choices consistent with that? Where do you think the outcome would be? Um, so yeah, so I embrace a transformative justice lens of work, changing the conditions that's generating harm as a norm, and that's what it fostered in me, wanting to change the conditions more than changing our children. And they get that from me when I talk to them. Like, look, I don't think that the problem rests with you. I think there's definitely a problem with your behavior and your actions, but I don't think anything is wrong with you. I think something might have happened to you, and there's an explanation to it. And if there's an explanation, there's a solution. And if there's a solution, then there's hope, right? And you can solve this and you can fix this, you know? And I let them know that, look, no matter what, I have hope in you. I love you. You know what I mean? And I've been down that road. You know what I'm saying? Um, I went down that road. The bridge is out down that road, and I'm not trying to judge you or tell you how to live your life. I'm just trying to let you know what lies ahead, from my own experiences. And that seems to go a long way. Whenever I talk to young people or facilitate processes with them, I lead with the fact that, I've caused similar harms, so I'm not here. I don't have the capacity to judge you at all. You know what I mean? Matter of fact, what you've done may not be anywhere. There's probably no moral equivalent to what you've done to what I've done. So I have no capacity to judge you. But I don't have the capacity to say sorry to the person that I harmed. You know, you have an opportunity to not only say sorry, but do sorry for the person that you've harmed. And so it might behoove you to do so. You know what I mean? And so that's how the dialogue that I have with them is kind of like an old head, somebody that been down that road, that know what it's like to cause harm. You know what I mean? Somebody that admires them. I have hope in them, and that I don't see them as any less than anyone else. But again, not excusing the behavior that they caused.
Mm,
You know?
thank you.
Yeah.
We have a question about how you work with prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement to get buy-in for this approach. Danielle, do you want to take that one to start?
Sure. And I think this connects to another question of that someone raised of sort of trying to make sense of what the system is trying to do, how much energy to put there. And I'm like, the system is made up of so many people with so many different intentions, some of them noble, some of them ugly, some of them exhausted, some of them self-interested, some of them service-oriented. Like the systems it's not one thing, right? It's incredibly complex, and there's constraints they all face, and there's also all these human actors exercising all this discretion at all these places. I think the thing I would say, there's so much to say about how we move system actors. I think the fact that we are deeply and truly survivor-centered is very important, that they understand survivors consent to the process, that they want it, that they benefit from it. And for the best among them who do want to meet the needs of survivors that are in the work for that reason, it's deeply resonant for them. I think they are responsive to our efficacy. Like, I think the success of what we do resonates, especially for more seasoned prosecutors who like win their first big case and lock someone up, and then 12 years later are prosecuting the same person for the same thing or worse. And it really like takes the wind out of your sails. And I think they've seen the limitations of the tools available to them. Um, and the people who've seen those limitations most, I think, have the most appetite for it. So it's often the most seasoned people who are actually most open to it. But I think the other thing I've learned much more recently about working with system actors is that it's very useful for us to not pretend we are the same. I think it's really easy to try and sort of overstate our alignment, our similarity, that we all have one goal here. And we don't. Like, there are places where we have overlapping interests, and we can stand in those places and act together in the interest of safety, in the interest of survivors, in the interest of justice, and those things. as you may have guessed, I'm not good at like pretending things. So I think in the times where I felt like I had to pretend we agreed more than we did, it didn't go well. And even people who were better at pretending things, it didn't seem to go well. And I think the thing that's been most productive is to be able to say, like, we have different constituents, we have different responsibilities, we have different constraints, we have different tools, like we have different underlying philosophies, we have different missions. And here we are together deciding, can we take this action together? And that has proven like so much more fruitful, so much more honest. It's given space for much more frank conversations and much more generative conversations. And it's also not required us to ever be dishonest about who we are. And so I think for people interfacing in those relationships, it's not that you have to say every single thing you think out loud. I've learned that is not, in fact, a great thing to do. But that you don't have to pretend that your small grassroots nonprofit built in service of liberation is the same thing. That you can reach an agreement to do things without overstating the similarity. And I think that's been extremely helpful for us.
Great, thank you. One thing I've discovered in the limited time that I've been, working on this in a small way is that a lot of survivors don't know that restorative justice is an option, or perhaps it isn't an option where they live. What do you all want to see us do? Those of us on the call tonight, those of us who are going to watch the recording tomorrow, what should we do to help ensure that people are aware of this option, and to build, the widespread call for this path forward, as we imagine a future, Danielle, like you described, where the impossible is possible now. How do we build that knowledge base, that understanding, and the demand for this way forward? Ghani, you want to start? We've got 1 minute.
Oh, I thought you know what, Jody? I thought you was putting that question to the people, the viewers and the listeners. For us, right? No, no, you go, Danielle, because we have like a minute left.
I'll be quick. I think tell everyone you know, talk about it in a normal way. Like, and I think like ask people questions, be curious. And more than anything, like look to the places in your life that are most like the world you want, like the examples of the grandmas who dragged you over to the other kids' mama to apologize for what happened on the playground, and like build from our understanding that we do actually do this. We do versions of it all the time. And I think it's that sense of the familiarity, the innateness, the possibility of it in our day-to-day lives that can form the basis for bringing a lot of people who'd otherwise oppose it, and the confidence and energy to fight for it at a bigger scale.
Wonderful.
Well said.
Well, thank you to our incredible speakers and to our audience. I'm sorry we didn't get to every question, but we are going to send a follow-up email to everyone who has registered, with some of the resources that were shared here and additional resources that you may want. But thank you again. We really appreciate you all joining us lakeside. And be well. Until next time, take good care.
Be blessed.